All right, we have more changes unfolding over in the swamp of Washington, D.C., specifically over on Pennsylvania Avenue. Changes that have the Biden administration about to declare a national climate emergency. This isn't a joke. Biden's top aides carefully just leaked out their plan to select media organizations yesterday in an attempt to get this out there and gauge the response from the American people, see how much pushback they'd receive. And some of the plans they have, the plans that they decided to share with these media organizations, are downright frightening. But before we get started, thank you for liking and sharing these videos. It really helps out the channel, and consider subscribing so you don't miss these regular updates. So what the hell's going on? Well, top Biden aides just leaked their plan to declare a national climate emergency, saying the announcement could come any day, basically. Now, this has been in the works for years. There's been whispers about this since Biden was first inaugurated. Far-left members of Congress have been pressuring him to do this, but behind the scenes, they've been working on how to get it done. Everything that I've heard was that he would wait until his second term to do this. He didn't want to rock the boat before November. So why then would they be moving forward with this now, just 6 months out from November? Well, maybe because they realize it's a long shot that he even wins in November. He most likely will never have a second term, so we better do this while we can. Look, folks, this is a big deal, a major policy move. It's not just like symbolism to highlight climate change. This is declaring a national emergency, which means the president would instantly be granted additional powers. According to the Washington Post, he would have over 130 additional powers that he could utilize to battle the climate emergency. Watch this.
The White House is considering declaring a national climate emergency to unlock federal powers and stifle oil development. That's according to Bloomberg. Tell me what a climate emergency is and what that might entail.
So when we talk about the potential for the president to declare a climate emergency, what it's saying is, you know what, there's a national emergency going on, and I need extra powers to be able to respond to it to protect the U.S. This is a contentious decision. If it's made, this discussion has come up many times. But if it is made, then the president would have additional powers in the short term.
Here's what Bloomberg writes, quote, Democrats and environmental activists are pushing the president to declare a climate emergency and unlock sweeping powers to combat global warming and broad legislation that stalled in Congress. Sweeping new powers to combat global warming and skirt by the Congress. This is something civil liberties advocates have been concerned about since he was sworn in, warning that the Democrat Party would use climate as a way to get their agenda rammed through. Even though America's not on board with this, if we were, then these bills would be approved in Congress, but they don't have the votes. That's how our system works. Congress is made up of 535 members, 100 of them serve in the Senate, the rest are in the House. Each member represents a slice of America, represents a portion of the American electorate. And Congress has voted down these Green New Deal policies each time, which is why they've been working behind the scenes on ways to get around Congress. And now they're openly pressuring him to do this, something he's clearly about to do or seriously considering doing. So what happens if he does? His top aides, look, they're leaking this to the media for a reason. So what happens if he does? Well, it would allow them to bypass voting on things like the Green New Deal. Hell, who needs to vote on a multi-trillion-dollar law that dictates the way we live? Why vote on it when we can just declare a national emergency? That's what's happening here. And it's not just about spending trillions of more dollars. It's about control. Whenever you want to know what the Democrats are planning, look to Europe. They have the same agenda, only the EU doesn't have the same checks and balances that the US does. For example, something that I saw last year that stuck with me was a movement ban. Basically like freedom of movement. That France banned its citizens from moving around. Like you're not allowed to go there, but you can go here. That kind of thing. Freedom of movement. Look at this BBC article. Quote, Europe heatwave. Outdoor events banned in parts of France. It says this, outdoor public events have been banned in an area of France as a record-breaking heat wave sweeps across Europe. Concerts and other large gatherings have been called off. On Thursday, parts of France hit 40 degrees Celsius earlier in the year than ever before, with temperatures expected to peak on Saturday. Scientists say periods of intense heat are becoming more frequent and longer lasting as a result of global warming. Officials said public events will be prohibited from Friday at 2 p.m. until the end of the heat wave. Indoor events at venues without air conditioning are also banned. Private celebrations, though, such as weddings, will still be allowed, unquote. What does that sound like, folks? Lockdowns. It sounds like climate lockdowns, which under a national emergency, the president has the authority to invoke the same way they did during the pandemic. It's the same authorities. They had a national emergency for the pandemic. Now they'll have a national climate emergency for this, but only for some odd reason. The climate emergency appears to give Biden even additional powers, even more powers than Trump had with the Cove. And if you think they're not going to take advantage of this, invoke, for example, climate lockdowns, well, realize there's a reason they want to invoke this, invoke a national emergency. They need the additional powers for some reason. And if you don't remember how good lockdowns were for the environment, that was a real thing. Lockdowns during Cove really did help the environment. If you don't remember, this may refresh your memory. Watch this.
If there is a silver lining to this crisis, it's visible in the skies above China.
All of this inaction, while causing so many humans problems, has actually proven to be quite good for Mother Earth.
Falling pollution levels brought about by lockdowns may have been shining an impact on sunshine.
Wild animals are now roaming city streets.
How do we make sure these pollution levels don't rebound?
Here's an article from The Hill titled, quote, "Coming Soon, Climate Lockdowns." And they go through a list of government officials and different organizations who are openly calling for and pushing urgent climate-related changes, talking about climate lockdowns. And one of the people they mention, that The Hill mentions in this article, is Bill Gates, talking about how lockdowns during the pandemic were only a start, that they helped but barely. Basically, that we would need to go much, much further to really move the needle on CO2 emissions. And to get a sense of what he has in mind for tackling climate change, because realize, Bill Gates plays a huge role in forming U.S. policy. He played a massive role during the pandemic. Well, Bill Gates wrote an article on his personal website that just takes the cake. He wrote this on his personal blog, and yes, he has one of those. It's called Gates Notes. See the blog of Bill Gates? He writes this, quote, "The Cove was awful. Climate change could be worse." And just think for a minute about how drastic lockdowns were during the Cove. How many people stayed home? How many cars were off the road? How many buses were halted? How much public transportation had virtually stopped? He says that was nothing. It's like the warm-up act. Basically, he says that even though emissions went down around 8% during the lockdown, he says that number isn't a lot. It's the equivalent of around 47 billion tons of carbon versus 51 billion tons. He says, quote, "What's remarkable is not how much emissions will go down because of the pandemic, but how little they did," unquote. I'll spare you from reading any more of this, but look, the climate alarmists have gotten their hooks into the president. He does whatever he's told anyways, and his top aides are telling him to enact their agenda. So what will this look like? Well, according to Bloomberg, here's some of the policy changes they say they're going to enact immediately upon declaring this. These are like the PG-rated policies, folks. They include blocking crude exports, limiting the movement of fossil fuels domestically throughout the country. By the way, that would lead to what? No gasoline, the goal to prevent gas-powered vehicles, something they already committed to do by 2030 or 2035 or something like that. Also, immediately suspend offshore drilling, even on existing leases, something he's not allowed to do without these additional powers. But what about clean energy? This gets into the Green New Deal. Remember that beauty of a bill from AOC? Well, Bloomberg says this will let Biden divert federal money to construct renewable energy projects using federal money already allocated by Congress for other things like the border, like FEMA or whatever, and divert it to fight climate change. And look, we know once these politicians and bureaucrats have a taste for power, they don't want to give it up. We just saw that with the Pfizer reauthorization. And Biden would have all these additional powers going into November. How he could use them or abuse them, I don't know. But whenever the federal government wants more power, we should be worried. All right, that wraps up this episode. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.